You ever just stop and wonder, what's the ultimate point of all this? Where are we all headed? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating perspective from the introduction to the ancient Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And it kicks off with one of the biggest questions of all.
So let's just get right to it. The big one. The question that really drives pretty much all religion and all philosophy. What is our ultimate destination? Where are we as conscious beings actually going? The yogis begin their entire system of thought right here with this question.
And their central idea is this: we all come from a state they call the absolute. Now think of it as this perfect, formless source condition. The core idea is that all life, everything we see, everything we are, it all springs from this state, and it's on a journey to return right back to it.
But before we really dig into that journey, the text first takes a look at two very common, but according to the yogis, totally flawed ideas about our destiny. They basically see these as incorrect maps that are just going to lead us astray.
Okay, so on one hand, you've got the classic idea of heaven, our world, but with all the bad stuff magically taken out. And on the other hand, you have a more modern idea, that we're just meant to improve forever and ever on this straight line of infinite progress that never actually arrives anywhere.
Let's look a little closer at that first theory. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? An eternal place, just like this one, only perfected. You get to keep all the good parts of life, and all the evil, all the pain, all the suffering, poof, it's just erased.
Well, the author's critique here is incredibly blunt. They call this idea absurd and puerile, which basically means childish. And why? Well, because logically you just can't have good without evil. The concepts are defined by each other. So a world with only good is, as they put it, just a dream in the air.
All right, now for theory number 2, which feels very modern, very optimistic. It's the idea that humanity is on this constant upward trajectory. We're always improving, always progressing, forever and ever. There's no final destination, there's just the journey forward.
And you guessed it, the text calls this one absurd too. Even though it sounds nice, it gets rejected based on a really fundamental law of nature. So, if these two popular maps are wrong, then what's the alternative?
And this brings us right to the core of the yogi's perspective, nature's unavoidable circle. This is their map of reality. See, the principle that just completely refutes infinite progress is actually pretty simple. The text states, there is no such thing as motion in a straight line. Everything moves in a circle. They say if you could throw a stone out into deep space and wait long enough, it would eventually come back. An infinite straight line, they argue, has to eventually become a circle. We can see this principle playing out on a massive cosmic scale. You have these formless clouds of gas, right? Nebulae. They condense and form stars and planets. Those stars live for billions of years. And then they dissolve, returning all their matter right back to the nebulae they came from. It's a perfect, complete circle. So here's the crucial point. This law is uniform. It doesn't just apply to planets. It applies to everything, all forces, even things like the love or the hate we put out into the world. They're sent out from us, they complete a circuit, and they must eventually return to their source. And that source is you.
The big idea is that we come from this absolute, we live our entire lives within it, and ultimately we have to return to it. As the text says so beautifully, from whom all this universe comes out and to whom all returns. This isn't presented as a choice, it's presented as a fundamental law of nature, just like gravity. Okay, but this idea of returning to the source, it raises a huge question, right? Is that actually a good thing? Or is it more like returning to nothingness? Let's see how the yogis actually define this state.
This is the key objection, isn't it? If we're just going back to where we started, doesn't that make this whole human experience kind of a pointless step down? A degeneration from some perfect state? And the yogis' answer is, well, it's a bit of a shocker. They say, yes, our current manifested state is a degeneration. They argue that almost every religion in the world views humanity as having fallen from some pure or perfect beginning. But, and this is the key, it's a necessary degeneration.
The analogy of the seed makes this crystal clear. For a huge, magnificent tree to grow, the seed itself has to be destroyed. It has to go into the ground, disintegrate, completely dissolve. And it's out of that very degeneration that a higher form of regeneration, the tree, can emerge. Our human lives, we're in that seed phase.
But a lot of people fear this absolute state. It's like being a stone, unthinking, lifeless. The text tackles this fear head-on by comparing two very different kinds of thoughtlessness. A stone is below reason.
It simply lacks the capacity. But God, or the Absolute, is beyond reason. It doesn't need to reason things out because everything is already known to it.
There's an analogy from physics that makes this even clearer. Think about darkness. There's darkness because light vibrations are too low for our eyes to see, like infrared. But there's also a kind of darkness because the vibrations are too high for us to see, like ultraviolet. They look the same to us, just darkness, but they are polar opposites. The unthinking stone and the all-knowing Absolute. They are those two different poles.
Okay, so if our ultimate destiny is a state that's beyond our normal intellect, how do we even begin to think about getting there? And really, why should we believe it's the highest state to begin with?
Well, the text gives us three main reasons. First, the greatest spiritual figures in history, all of them, have pointed to a reality beyond the mind. Second, they didn't just talk about it, they left behind specific methods and paths so others could verify it for themselves. And third, without it, no other theory can really explain existence without eventually just falling into meaninglessness. And this is really the fundamental value of this whole perspective. It dares to look beyond what the philosopher Kant called the tremendous dead wall of reason. Because, the yogis argue, the real answers to life's biggest questions, they're not found within the limits of our intellect, but just on the other side.
This entire path is framed as a kind of science of religion, a practical method for crossing what the text calls the vast ocean of ignorance of our current state. The goal is to reach the other shore, a state of absolute knowing, which is expressed in this final prayer. Thou art our Father, and wilt take us to the other shore.
So, we'll just leave you with this final thought to consider. We rely on our reason for almost everything we do. But what if the ultimate explanation for why we're here, where we're from, and where we're going, what if it lies just beyond the reach of reason itself?